So, good evening, everyone. For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Rabbi Zachary Goodman, and just on behalf of the Holy Blossom Temple and the Luke Sklar Mental Health Initiative, I want to thank you for attending our program tonight, this evening discussing anxiety in the time of COVID. So the Holy Blossom Temple takes very seriously the field of mental health. And I just want to start this evening by saying a word about our namesake. So Luke Sklar was a loving family man and a true leader in business and the community. His care and strategic guidance helped build a better Holy Blossom Temple and enriched our congregation immeasurably. Luke's openness with his depression and determination to bring greater awareness inspired the initiative that now bears his name. Our goal as a committee, as a community, is to provide education, support, and resources related to the challenges of mental health. If you'd like to learn more about this initiative and any of our upcoming programming, please reach out to me at zgoodman@holyblossom.org. And I'll also just make mention of some of the really truthfully wonderful resources that we have available online for mental health in the everyday world, as well as mental health in these trying times of this pandemic. So I do hope that if you are interested to learn a little more, or if you yourself are in need of some help, do take a look at the resources that we've made available online. Just quickly before we get started, I want to just say a word that we welcome your conversations. We want to hear from you this evening. So if you do have any questions from our panelists, which we'll be introducing in just a moment, at any time during our evening tonight, just shoot us a question in the chat box, and you can send it to all panelists and attendees. And so you want to please don't send any direct messages to any of our panelists, because they won't see it. So if you do have a question for the Q&A session that will take place at the end of our evening, please just send that to all panelists and attendees. We apologize in advance if your question is not addressed. But do know that there are many members of the Holy Blossom Luke Sklar Mental Health Initiative here this evening that we can reach back out to you. So without any further ado, I want to introduce someone who needs no introduction, is our cantorial soloist, Lindy Rivers, who will be serving as our moderator for the panel this evening. Goody, I was going to say Shabbat Shalom, but it's just Shabbat Tov, and very good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks, Rabbi Goodman. Good evening, everyone. We're glad that you have joined us to hear from a terrific panel of mental health experts and to have some of your questions addressed. The intent of our discussions on the anxiety that so many of us are quite naturally feeling in these remarkable times is to provide some insight, expand our understanding, and perhaps help us walk away with a few strategies for coping. I'd like to introduce our panel. Sandra Rotholz has been practicing for over 18 years as an individual, couples, and sex therapist. She's a registered psychosexual therapist and social worker. Sandra has a full-time private practice in downtown Toronto. She has a special interest in coaching people to have healthier relationships. Welcome, Sandra. Doreen Saskin is a professional social worker with over 25 years of counseling experience in her private practice. She graduated from Boston University with an MSW specializing in clinical social work. Welcome, Doreen. Dr. Gregory Hamovich is a registered clinical psychologist who has been practicing clinical and health psychology for the past 36 years. In addition to his private practice, Dr. Hamovich is currently a faculty and clinical supervisor in the graduate program in clinical and counseling psychology at University of Toronto and consulting psychologist in the musculoskeletal rehabilitation program at the Toronto Rehabilitation Institute, University Health Network. Welcome, Greg. I'm going to begin, let's jump right in, and I'm going to ask a question to you first, Doreen, and it's this. How can I learn to be more optimistic and hopeful about the future when there's so much uncertainty?
Hello. So these past few months have been about transition, survival, and worry. This is a once in a century situation, a global crisis. We're in a time of not knowing with so much uncertainty. What will determine how well we will manage this crisis is not how many good or bad things happen to us, but how well we are able to tolerate uncertainty as we obsess about viral transmission and the economy. Dealing with the unknown and change is difficult. Simply stated, we can't control life, only our responses to it. We can still be happy and hopeful in difficult times. How? By cultivating hope, a positive vision of the future. So how do we develop optimism? Optimism is being hopeful about the future, even when the present seems negative. I read that optimism is 50% genetic and 50% learned. That is a very hopeful statistic. With this challenge of finding hope during hard times, it's our choice to either work really hard at this or to stay miserable. So what are 5 things to do to develop optimism? Notice negative thinking, always assuming the worst instead, try to focus on the positives, like what's strong, not wrong, and finding pockets of joy. Practicing a gratitude ritual on a daily basis. What's one thing to be appreciated? Maybe that your family is staying healthy. Focus on what we can control and let go of the rest to enjoy the good things in life. Remind ourselves of our innate resilience by recalling our strength from past stressful times. And lastly, embracing humor. The ability to laugh at ourselves is really helpful in coping with negativity. It feels like COVID's going to go on forever, but it won't. We've lost normalcy, but there is still room for optimism.
Thank you, Doreen. The next question is for you, Greg. There's a paradox of worry. There's anxiety, rumination, loss of sleep. What are some of the ways to ease this anxiety and effectively cope while feeling so out of control being isolated at home?
The terminology paradox of anxiety. And you sort of provided actually the perfect segue for this evening in terms of your introductory remarks when you talked about our quite naturally feeling anxiety, because I think that's the piece that I'm going to start with, which of course in this time, it is quite natural to feel anxiety. And that's why we're considering sort of naming this panel the paradox of anxiety, because some degree of anxiety, of course, is completely normal, but the new normal is not normal. So the fact that we are experiencing anxiety is just kind of a good indication that we're all still alive, and that's probably a good thing. I think so, I do want to start by normalizing the fact that anxiety in a way is a new normal, but it can still be distressing and or interruptive in our lives in some ways. And one of the ways that anxiety first starts to interfere can be with our sleep, laying up at night, ruminating or thinking about kinds of things. And we know that sleep is important for all kinds of health, particularly mental health, but physical health as well. And so, I'm just going to give a few sleep hygiene tips, which is having a standard wake time is very helpful every day. Making sure that the hour before you go to bed is not screen time or Zoom time, but is actually some kind of quiet time, just doing something to relax. And then also to decide that you're going to make a decision for yourself that sleep time is definitely not worry time. So there is a little thing that I call a worry hour. It really doesn't have to be a full hour, which people can use. It sounds a little bit hokey, but actually can be quite effective, which is to set aside a time during the day that works best for you, which you set aside as your worry time. And you'll find, I call it a worry hour, but no one ever makes it up to an hour. In fact, most people get sick and tired of their worrying after about 15 or 20 minutes and want to turn it off. But it is a way of just deciding that there's a particular time that you're going to worry, and that when it interferes, it opportune time, such as when you're trying to fall asleep, you can just remind yourself, you know what, I don't really have to think about this now. I've already got my worry time set up. So really I can attend to nicer, pleasant thoughts right now. There are a number of other very practical things that certainly help people manage with anxiety. One is creating a regular and predictable schedule, the kind of schedule that we might have had before all of this hit. So if you get up and do things at a particular time of day and can make that schedule predictable, then certainly that can be quite helpful. Making sure there is some sense of purpose to every day. And then there are the range of kind of both physical and mental techniques that people can use. And we've sort of added some reference sites for you online, but things like breathing exercises, meditation, yoga, the obvious ones, walking, exercise, connecting with others. And for those who are sick and tired of the Zoom cocktail, regular old-fashioned telephone is not a bad idea if we are sick and tired of screen time. Picking up a new hobby, learning something new is also something that can be very effective. So I think there's a range of practical things in that light that people can attend to. And then lastly, to just sort of talk about the fact that, when we talk about anxiety and mental health, we talk about sort of body, mind, and spirit. And if we sort of look to the Mishaberach that is recited in most congregations every Shabbat during the Torah service, there is a sort of specific reference to a refuah haguf and refuah hanefesh, both the body and the soul and the spirit. And a reminder that anything that we can do that uplifts the soul and the spirit is also something that is very helpful with anxiety.
Thank you, Greg. Sandra, how does one grieve the many losses that we are experiencing due to this virus? Health, deaths perhaps, jobs, loss of feeling safe, etc. What can you help tell us about that?
Sure. Okay. So thank you, first of all, for having me on the panel with Doreen and Greg. I want to say, Greg, brilliant, Doreen as well. And the idea of the worry hour, for me, I was just thinking about it, that it allows us to acknowledge that it's okay to worry, but that we can also be really productive about that worry and sort of give it its own space. So thank you for the suggestions. In terms of the idea around grief, I think it's really important, first of all, that we understand that everyone has a different experience of what grief can be. And so we really need to understand that part. I also really believe it's important when we talk and we think about grief or losses that we want to learn how to respond instead of react. And it was Thomas Hubel who I think really poetically said it, that reacting is acting before feeling, but responding is the action which is informed by our feelings. So the more that we learn how to respond to ourselves and to the people around us, I feel that can give us a healthier balance. It can allow us to look to us, but also our collective and our community in terms of understanding grief and loss. The other piece to also really imagine is that grief, loss is not linear. And I think especially with understanding the stages of grief, we're in week 15 now, and it's an emotional roller coaster that, not me, I'm assuming everybody, we didn't buy a ticket for this one. And so we really need to pay attention to that and how we sort of extend ourselves out to family and community. Understanding those stages are really important. And remember what I said, they're not linear. So everyone is going to experience them in a different way. So we have denial, anger, sadness, acceptance, and meaning. To me, I just want to briefly talk about the acceptance piece and then meaning, because the acceptance is when we're saying, okay, life, these situations are occurring and I need to figure out how I want to proceed for myself. Part of the acceptance is really understanding how we want to use, like Greg was talking about earlier, our mind and our body, making those connections and strategizing so that we can feel more empowered and also nurtured. The meaning is really wanting to respond, like I talked about earlier, with compassion to ourselves and the people around us. I'll give a quick example. It was a couple weeks ago. I, with my husband, attended the virtual Shabbat service with Rabbi Splansky, Cantor Meisner, and Reverend Dr. Anthony Bailey. You know, I heard many that evening was that we need to make our own others. And that really hit me in terms of understanding meaning around what we've been experiencing. So I think that it allows us to feel with purpose and understand more what the impact of COVID is and our future. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. How does one cope with having children and adolescents at home and the extra stress of parenting challenges? I don't know how many parents we have out there, but this has been a common question. Sandra, can you talk about young children?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about young kids, I'm thinking more around the ages from birth to probably 11 years old. And then, you know, it's sort of transitions from there. I really think it's important. So I just wanted a little bit of a spin on this question, that we think about the couple. The couple is the parents. And so often we're asked about the kids, which I think are very, very important. But I think we also really need to think about the couple or the parents. So if we can understand them and we can help the couple be more secure and grounded, then they're going to be able to manage the many challenges and changes that are occurring, I think, in the overall family, whether that's the immediate or even the extended family as well. So that's important. We want to think about that relational dance that the couple does together, because that then extends out to their children and it becomes a bigger bubble, which is really key. And especially now that we're sort of merging our bubbles and we're seeing more and more that it's not only the immediate family, we're going out further to, which I think a lot of grandparents are very excited about, and larger extended family. It was Rudolf Steiner who said, love starts when we put our egos aside. Maybe that's actually my answer, Lindy. You know, how do we cope with young children and as couples? If we put our egos aside, then that's when we can really start to build something. As well, I think my husband and I asked him, so he said, yeah, it was good, I could share this. We created, and going again with what Greg was saying, meditation piece, my husband and I created a mantra for when we had our kids, and we've stuck to it. So I always say to couples when they're younger with their kids, think about a mantra for yourself. And for my husband and I, it was about guidance, limits, and nurturing. It's really important. Be clear with your words so that your kids can be clear with you. And please remember, don't take things too personally, because I feel that they're frustrated, just like we are at times. And I really hope our coping strategies as the functioning adults, we have those strategies. Our kids, they're just learning how to have those strategies. Okay, I'm
Thanks,
done.
Sandra. I think it's great advice to keep our egos out of our relationships at any time. I think that's just good marital advice. Probably good parenting advice too. Doreen, how about adolescents? How do we deal with our teenagers?
Well, quarantining with teens can be challenging. Maybe they're frustrated and angry about the loss of their pre-COVID lives and missing their friends when they are needed the most. Maybe they regressed with a newfound inability to self-regulate. What teens crave is choice and independence, definitely not lockdown. We may see lots of pushback, that's to be expected. The best gift we can give our kids is to make them feel understood. To validate their stress, this is a powerful coping skill. So, to take good care of your teens, try to take good care of yourself first, ideally. Aim to stay calm and keep them feeling calm and secure. Practice self-care and healthy behaviors like we've all said. Connect with family and friends for comfort and support. Your family is not alone in this crisis. We are part of a greater whole. Try distraction to improve your moods and stop dwelling. Maybe plan some solo time to recharge. And lastly, focus on the positives. What you choose to focus on determines your level of happiness, and your teens are watching you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Greg, what about adult children who worry about their parents?
So I sort of have to be upfront here. It's a bit difficult to separate the professional from the personal in answering this question as a parent of 3 adult children and having many friends and colleagues who are in a similar position. And the other challenge, of course, to this one is that there is no clear answer. And if someone out there has an answer for me, I'd love to hear it. I think there are as many answers as there are families. I've been trying to understand this because, and sort of what I'm thinking of when I'm answering this question is largely sort of the children in the 25 to 40-year range and parents in the 60-plus range who are all being considered by our children a vulnerable population. And I understand, I mean, they have the best of intentions. Their concern is for our health and therefore their health and their children's health as well. And I think they're experiencing some very real fear. And on our side, I think we are experiencing sort of a situation in which by virtue of their fear, we are forced to look at our own mortality and our denial of it. So I understand that it creates, those combinations create a lot of psychological conflict, and the fear, frankly, can sometimes get translated or sound more like irritation or anger than fear, and that may be how it comes out. So, there is no one solution to this. I suppose the only solution is that every family has to be comfortable talking openly about it. I think this is a circumstance in which people are going to have to feel free to disagree. They're going to have to agree to disagree, understand that there isn't an ideal solution. Whatever solution there's going to be is likely to be a compromise. And every family is going to have to figure out what works from them. And as long as that discussion happens in a kind of respectful and understanding manner, I think people will come up with a solution that works for themselves.
And that can be quite a conflict-ridden discussion, trying to come to terms with what a family who's living together or a bubble can agree are the rules of their isolation together.
And I think as the bubble gets extended, this gets more and more complicated.
I think so. And I just want to ask as well, what if you have adult children that live with you and you are, you're parenting them, but they may or may not be worried about you, but you're dealing with an adult that you have concerns about as well.
Yeah, well, I think you've answered the question by saying adult children, because I think what we have to remember is that they are adults, and much as some of them may regress at this period of time, some of the parents may also do so at this period of time. I think it's important to remember that they're independent, they have their own thoughts, they are adults, and that we can love them, but we can't necessarily solve all their problems for them either. Yeah.
Yes, and I guess we have to help them to solve their own. My daughters will be very happy to hear that. I want to ask each of you individually, what have we learned from this pandemic and lockdown that is helpful in moving forward and will allow us to live our lives in a more productive way? Greg, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, well, I guess what I've sort of learned through this is how resilient many and most people are. And it's sort of, I think we're linking back to where we started with Doreen's comments on optimism, because I'm very optimistic about the learning opportunities that have arisen from this. I mean, none of us are happy that we had to acquire the lessons under these circumstances. But I think people have found ways of managing, ways of being, ways of creating a life for themselves under circumstances that none of us ever imagined or prepared for, and have done so in remarkably resilient ways. And I've spoken to any number of people who have, and they'll say, you know, I'm shocked at how well I'm doing. You know, or other people who say, you know, like, this has given me an opportunity to do something that I never thought I would do in my life. I've learned to play this, you know, people have taken up musical instruments online, and people have done all kinds of interesting things. And, you know, and we've all seen these sort of wonderful bits on the news every night, for those who still watch the news, of the kinds of innovation and creativity that has come out of this. So, you know, my lesson learned as a sort of as a person, but also as a therapist, is really the remarkable resilience that people have brought to this circumstance.
So I guess it's important for us to all believe that we have that resilience, even if we don't feel it all the time.
Yes, yes.
Sandra, how would you answer that question?
Okay, thank you. So going along, I think what Doreen and Greg were saying, but Doreen was talking about earlier, is that the word of optimism. And so I'm a fan and have read multiple times Dr. Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And he termed the phrase tragic optimism. And so, which means it's the human's capacity to creatively turn a negative aspects of life into something more positive or constructive. So I really think that COVID, to me, is an example of tragic optimism. It's made us have to rethink. We've had to reframe how we want to approach our problems. I think it's allowed us to, with pain, it's not easy, but it's allowed us to be maybe a bit more open, to enable us to sort of just new discoveries within ourselves. And I think our society, which is changing in many ways. Something to what Greg was saying also, that, you know, neuroscience research is very clear in terms of how to keep a healthy brain as we get older. And it's, you know, it's through the idea of constantly wanting to challenge and solving situations. To me, COVID is an example of how we keep a healthy brain, for the positives and negatives of it. Because, you know, when we do problem solving, we are helping our realms of perception. We are focusing ourselves, which is so important in terms of our attention, our intentions, and our attitudes. I think it also impacts on our moods as well. I really believe too, along with Viktor Frankl, I always get it wrong, but so I don't like to butcher words, so I apologize now, but it was Gita, who said, if you treat an individual as he is, he will remain how he is. But if we treat him as if he ought to be, and could be, then we can become that. And I think COVID and multiple other examples through our lives as human beings is showing us that repeatedly and repeatedly. So this is why we need to connect with our communities and our families, our friends, and know it's a struggle, but we can work through that. That's the beauty of it being tragic, but also optimistic. I mean, it's beautiful. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Sandra. It's very optimistic. Doreen?
Okay, I struggled with this question, but since lockdown, it seems to me that so many people are questioning how they lived before. And that being really busy was often associated with being really important. And like the pride of being so busy seems to be losing its appeal now as people look to spend their time in really more meaningful pursuits. So that's what I've noticed. And Obama's chief of staff famously said, never let a good crisis go to waste. So everybody can focus on this time and reinvent some aspect of themselves.
Thank you, Doreen. Yes, I've heard from a lot of people saying, I don't really want this to end so soon. The health crisis part of it, yes, but the slowing down part of it, and the part of not having to rush back into what might not have been the healthiest of lifestyles, maybe not so much that. I'd like to begin a question and answer period, and we'll be compiling any questions that have come in from our attendees. And so some questions that we have are, let's see, Sandra, would you like to take this one? With so much, oh, I'm sorry, hang on. Yes, with so much going on daily right now, what do you suggest for the couple to promote communication? Sounds like it's right up your alley.
No, okay, that was my first response. Okay, so I think, promoting communication. That means that couples want to talk to each other. So that's the start. And that was supposed to be funny. Okay, so I think that a couple suggestions in terms of, first of all, the couple really need to acknowledge and validate with each other that they do want to talk. And that's not only about the immediate family, but it's about work, personal. How are they creating their own intimacy together? I think is also really important. I always say to people, create that weekly sort of CEO meeting with each other. There's a beautiful self-reflection technique. Again, I don't want to butcher the word because I do not speak Japanese, but I believe it's nei-ikan, and it's a self-reflection process where you ask 3 questions to yourself about your partner. So what the 3 questions are: what have I received? What have I given? And what troubles or difficulties have I caused? And I think there are 3 solid questions because they give us enough of a framework to think about ourselves, but also our partner. And what I suggest to couples often is think about yourself in the last 24 hours. Think about those 3 questions, write down some thoughts, and then that once a week when you have a check-in with each other, use it as a focal point. Because we don't want things to escalate so much, because then that just gets really toxic and ugly, and who needs that right now? So that would be something I would definitely promote. And also remember and ask yourselves, how is it possible? Like, how can I help to support the people that I love around me in terms of good and healthier communication? There's positive strategies, right? Which is speaking with repair versus a weak strategy, i.e. I need to be right all the time. It just doesn't work. Okay,
Sandra, can you just say those 3 questions again in case people wanted to hear them again? The 3 questions that you can kind of come to one another with.
Sure. I would also, if people want to look it up, the spelling is Naikan, and it's a self-reflection process that you go through. So because the word itself means looking inside, which is so beautiful. In terms of how we want to reflect. So the questions are, what have I received? What have I given? And thirdly, what difficulties? How have I maybe been not so pleasant that I've caused? And you can use those 3 questions as a framework.
Okay, thanks. Doreen, some of us have very anxious friends and family members. What do we say to them? Can we help them? What do we do? And some people feel very helpless in knowing what to do in that situation.
So this is called joint catastrophizing, where everybody, commiserates. Can you believe? Oh my God, what if? This does not help. We all know how unpredictable COVID is, but to the what if that everybody asks, the what ifs, I say the adaptive reply is, then what? So the best antidote to anxiety is really a plan. So there's unproductive worry, which is the what if festival, what if, but we can't solve life's problems, particularly COVID. So productive worry is what helps solve problems. So we can ask ourselves, what can we try like in the next day, in the next week, in the next month? Because this is the plan and this diffuses worry. And it can help moving from more anxious to more helpful conversations and more hopeful conversations.
So those are things we could ask a friend, say, who is very anxious or feeling very badly, to help them think about what a plan might be on the short term.
Like, let's say they say they're adult son is, sleeping till 3 in the afternoon, and they could say, well, what's one small thing that might make a difference? Well, what if he got up before 11 and made some breakfast, or, just tiny, small, manageable steps to move things forward and to feel some progress.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Greg, what are some signs that a person might benefit from extra support or help? Someone is asking, how do I know if my anxiety is COVID? Is it something else? How do I know when I need?
Yeah, let me start and suggest that I'm not going to answer whether it's COVID or something else, because it may be COVID, but still be a disproportionate amount of anxiety that actually is related to COVID or not, and both of those might be worthy of professional attention. I think I'm going to sort of start by echoing a bit of what Doreen said around understanding anxiety, because anxiety is a signaling system, right? And it's a signaling system that tells us something is not right. And requires our attention. And that's the adaptive component of anxiety, is it forces us to be a little bit internally reflective and to look and say, what is it that's sort of going on here? In identifying that, there are two things that can happen. We can take action, in which case it's resolved, or there is no action, in which case we have to try and let it go and understand there's no action. Now, when those things don't work and the anxiety persists, then it can be sort of anxiety that compounds and goes awry. So anxiety typically exists in 3 different domains. It exists in the cognitive domain. It exists in the physiological domain, physical symptoms. The cognitive symptoms are more focus, lack of focus, concentration, those kinds of things. And then also the emotional domain. So what I would say is, if you're starting to experience anxiety in all 3 domains simultaneously, and that feels overwhelming, then that's probably an indication that some kind of professional help may get you over the circumstance. The other thing that we look for clinically in terms of determining whether something really needs professional attention is where there is a considerable change in social or occupational functioning. So if you start to notice in yourself or in someone you care about that there is a real change in occupational and social functioning, that's also a signal that's probably something that could benefit from professional help.
Thank you, Greg. A question that's been submitted from one of our attendees. My 3 daughters live in different parts of the planet. How do I balance anxiety about travel with my desire to visit them physically when Zoom just isn't enough? Who would like to address that?
Well, that's a question with no answer, other than remarkable sympathy for everyone who's in that situation right now. And people don't have to be on the other side of the planet for us to be experiencing that phenomena. When we go back to the question I had about adult children, sometimes they can live down the block and we still can't get over and hug them because of various circumstances. I suppose one has to follow guidelines around travel and be careful and be safe. And all of this for us is around risk minimization, right? That people are going to have to be comfortable about what risks they're prepared to take in order to meet some kinds of needs. And this is one of those questions where I would say that's something you want to really consider. What is your own risk level? What in the end is going to make you feel better by virtue of your choices? And if you are prepared to tolerate some anxiety and risk in terms of traveling because that benefit for you is really important, then I think you do so. If the anxiety is going to be so overwhelming that the travel isn't going to be pleasurable anyhow, then probably doesn't make sense to do it.
Yeah. And then there is the question of whether or not your adult child wants you to come and feels comfortable with you coming in the first place. To just, our own anxiety. Another question that was sent in. what role do you think the media has in our anxiety during the pandemic? And how do you feel we should engage with the news in a positive way? It's a good question.
Yes.
Doreen or Sandra, do you want to?
I can
Sandra?
try. I'll try. I would say it's really important to know your news source. I've been sent things that are ridiculous and can't possibly be true. I would say limit them to a few, probably not before bedtime, and focus on reliable news sources that you like and you can trust. And remember, there's no playbook for COVID. I mean, it's changing every day. We're learning new and different things, and just keep balance. Keep boundaries around it and try not to get carried away.
Can be very terrifying listening to the news and listening to all the various things that are being said. and it's hard to know what to believe. I think
and it's challenging because you don't know until you turn it on whether it's actually going to be good news or bad news.
that's very true.
Right, there has been some good news in Canada around this, and that's probably a good thing to know, but until the radio or television's on, you don't know whether it's going to be good
That's
news.
Right. In that sense, maybe it's better to keep it off.
Yeah.
Another question that's been submitted. How can you handle new occasions of grief that echo old occasions of grief?
I'll just put in a thought that, first of all, just even asking yourself that question is the answer. And I think it's about acknowledging and wanting to validate that we have multiple griefs and loss, or, we could see it as the pandemic itself is a trauma. And so I think we really need to pay attention to, what the traumas are doing. And then it's a question of how you want to help yourself, whether that's talking with a professional, talking with your family, with your friends. But let's absolutely acknowledge that the pandemic is a trigger for historical losses and griefs. So well done for whoever asked the question. I think you're being really honest with yourself.
Follow up,
go ahead, Greg.
Because what Sandra says, the question was specific to grief, but Sandra's comments are quite accurate, and it's not just a grief that maybe we experienced. It's any kind of trauma that may be more easily re-experienced at this time of real uncertainty. And one way of looking at it is that this is an opportunity for self-exploration and for kind of understanding both current and historical things at a deeper level, and hopefully coming off the other end in spite of the challenge. And this is not an easy thing to do by any stretch of the imagination, but it's possible to take it as an opportunity and come over the other side of it as a stronger person.
Thank you, Greg. Related to that also is, what if I have an underlying mental health condition? How do I prevent what's happening now from making it worse? It could be an underlying medical, physical condition as well that we feel more anxious about because they're telling us if you have a pre-existing condition, you're more at risk.
I think that if you already you have a diagnosis, you're working with your medical team or your therapist, this is definitely the time that you want to make sure that you're doing regular check-ins and make sure that you have your stabilizers, your resources, supports in place. Anything else, Doreen, Greg, that you have on that one?
Yeah, I would kind of echo that. This is not a time to change treatment regimens or look at doing things differently, other than maybe looking for additional support if that's what you need at this point in time, and creating professional and personal supports to help get you through what is a challenging time. Yeah.
Here's a question that's been submitted. Any tips for one in late 60s living alone and having had a recent loss of husband and having no family? It's hard to talk to friends because they will get tired of it.
Yeah, I can start. For one, I think this is a time to rely on friends or other people like that. And I think most people are understanding around these things. And, friends, I think, actually want to be there to help people, particularly during this very difficult time. That being said, if there is a concern about being too trying on those friendships, there are a number of resources that are available. I've passed those on to Lee Sklar. There are a whole number of chat lines and talk lines and groups that people can link up with online in some fashion. Many of them are anonymous for people who prefer not to self-identify. So I think there are a range of resources out there, which I know that Holy Blossom is making available to people.
Yes, very true.
And also, I'd say words don't express it. So again, it's really important that you're here tonight to listen, and hopefully you can gain some information. And like Greg was saying, use the resources. They're out there and they're for everybody.
And whoever sent that one, I'm sorry for your recent loss. Here is a question that makes me think of what was addressed before about talking about families. How do I prevent my children or other family members from noticing my anxiety? So really the question is there, are we meant to keep them from noticing it? What do we do with that?
I don't know, I'm shaking my head, which is like my nonverbal communication. I'm not really sure why we need to keep it from our family and friends, because that means we're holding shame about our anxiety. And I hope that people are hearing from all of us that we don't need to hold shame about having, personal emotional struggles. So I would encourage people to talk about it. Again, if it feels like you're being overwhelming to your family and friends, then use the resources that are available through the community and through Holy Blossom.
Mm-hmm. I would add to that too, that we teach our children, whatever the age they are, about how to handle difficulties in life by showing them how we're handling it ourselves, even if we're not doing such a great job. If we share that with them and share our struggles, it lets them know that they can share theirs too, and that it's okay to have feelings around what's going on.
And look, and this isn't just true about anxiety. I mean, it's true about the whole range of mental health concerns. I mean, the last number of years, I think, has opened up a wonderful and wide conversation around depression, anxiety, and all the mental health challenges that people have. I think we've moved a long way forward as a society, and certainly at Holy Blossom, there are these number of very wonderful initiatives in that regard. Many other places are doing similar kinds of things. So I think, as Sandra says, we should actually be encouraging the discussion and encouraging our kids to have the discussion. I think it's in the end for the betterment of all of us. Yeah.
I agree. And if I could just add one thing, I think you can talk to your kids and say, I'm having a hard time during COVID about X, Y, and Z. This is what I really miss about my pre-COVID life. How about you? What is it like for you? And what do you miss? And what's hard for you? And what are you struggling with? And I think you're just validating that this is an anxious time for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that do you see in your own practices perhaps an increase in depression in the last few months? What are you noticing? Well,
I think that I'm seeing kind of both sides of the coin in that regard. Certainly for people who suffer from depression, these can be particularly challenging times. And then on the other hand, Certainly, I've seen people who are with significant histories who are surprising themselves by their resilience. But what I would say is, again, it's similar to the anxiety piece. You know, you want to differentiate also what is kind of a normal amount of feeling low or feeling sad, you know, because sadness need not be depression. And people who are unable to see their kids or their grandkids or friends are certainly going to feel very sad or frustrated about those things. So I think, you know, helping to distinguish between normal sadness and or normal grief and real depression is the first step. And if it feels more like it's an overwhelming depression, then of course, as we've said before, professional help may be the route to go.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just add one thing,
Mhm.
you know, to go for help doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It just means this is hard. And there are people out there that can help you. You know, you don't have to do this alone.
So true. So many people feel alone, and it's important to reach out. A question that has come in is, how can I become stronger to deal with a second wave, if that's going to occur? Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, I guess I would ask, what have you done that's been really helpful in the first wave? And just, you
Do
know,
more of it.
exactly, write down the list of what's really worked, write down the list of what didn't really work so much, take that one off, add to the one about what has worked, and, you know, and let's hope that it's a question that doesn't have to be answered, but if it does, you know, I think all of us are going to have to be asking, how did we get through the first one? What worked for us? And use that information.
Mm-hmm.
I think also,
Mm-hmm. No, go ahead.
sorry, I was just going to add, to me, what Greg was saying. Also, when we think about the stages of grief, if we're going to the, you know, a second wave, remember we've gone through this, and the idea of acceptance and how we want to feel more empowered because we already know what has occurred. I'm hoping that's also really going to help people to feel, I don't like using the word control, but I'm going to use it. Maybe, you know, help us feel a different sense of control because we've already had the reality. And that's really, really important to remember.
Somebody did ask, you know, all of this uncertainty makes me feel out of control, and how are there any tips to taking back some of what, or at least the illusion of control?
I guess really focusing on what you can control in your life. What can I do now to feel less anxious, right? Again, having a plan, having, you know, instead of overthinking and dwelling on worst case scenarios, what about positive thoughts? Like, you know, where do I go from here?
Sounds like a good idea. I think we are going to, if there are any other questions that our participants would like to submit, send them in now, and we're going to wrap up very soon. So if there's anything burning, just send it in. Otherwise, I will ask, well, here's a question. How are anxiety and uncertainty similar or different?
Well, uncertainty can be a component of anxiety, but not everyone who's anxious necessarily experiences uncertainty. You know, prolonged uncertainty, though, understandably, can lead to anxiety. But anxiety, as I said earlier, manifests in also different domains. So, you know, we can have physiological symptoms of anxiety, we can have emotional symptoms, and then we can have more of the cognitive kinds of symptoms. So uncertainty is sort of more a cognitive symptom of anxiety. But I would say that anxiety is sort of a more overriding phenomena, and uncertainty can be a component of that. But of course, it's a tough thing for everyone. I mean, we are living in uncertain times. And this is something that everyone, I think, is struggling and challenged with at this point in time. So, if I'm going to sort of normalize anxiety, I'm also going to normalize uncertainty, because that's something we're all living with on a daily basis now.
Absolutely, and to a higher degree than I think any of us have ever experienced. So much that we don't know. Usually there's uncertainty, but we have maybe some sense of something that might be definite down the road. But it wasn't the way for so long. And I think that was very difficult. We have a request for more examples of getting back control. Tips. How do I feel more in control of my life?
So I think, when we're talking about some of these words, whether it's anxiety or prolonged uncertainty, control, maybe it's an umbrella. And so I want to be very cautious with people when we're using these words. And it's also the idea of stress, and we can put in stress in there. So when we talk about control, is it stress? Is it uncertainty? And I think it's about some examples in terms of what's positive stressors, what are the negative stressors? And that's in some ways where we get it, stress in itself gets a bad rap, but it doesn't need to. So I, again, would be asking people to think about what they've done, not only in the last 15 weeks, but previous, when you had other stressors in your lives, other emotional roller coasters, so that we can keep some perspective in terms of how we want to feel that, control. Or maybe it's about a calmness.
And what Greg was saying earlier is that humans adapt and we're all resilient. And that is just something that we've seen time and again. And I think that's a great reminder when you're feeling so out of control.
I see another question coming in. I'm finding it difficult to find a silver lining or optimism after the recent loss. Just a moment, and I'll read what the rest of it is. Of my young brother. Sorry, how do I find new meaning in my life with this void?
I would just say, first of all, again, words don't express the loss for you. So thank you for sharing that you've lost your younger brother. That's a process. And to me, that's a very personal process that you need to go through. It doesn't mean that you have to be optimistic. It's more about how you want to live and sort of have your experiences right now, day to day, making sure that you're taking care of yourself in terms of some of your basic needs, I think is really what you should be focusing on, as well as instead of the big picture, let's take it down to, instead of macro, I always ask people, especially now, to think about the micro strengths, micro disappointments. It can allow us to feel more calmer.
And I would add that that's a really hard thing to get through. There's no shortcuts. There's no easy way to grieve. And you don't have to do it alone. Maybe a professional could be helpful. We have a group at Holy Blossom, a bereavement group, but also teletherapy is huge right now. I would suggest that it would be a really great time not to go through this alone.
Yeah, I think the issue of time is kind of, which both Doreen and Sandra have already spoken about. And again, so sorry that for kind of a tragic loss, but, the silver lining and the meanings may not be happening quite now, and it doesn't mean that they won't happen. Everyone processes this in their own way, in their own time. And, making meaning of tragic loss, I think, is something that happens after a significant period of time, and not often after a recent loss, particularly, so it takes time. So I guess what I'm saying is there's actually reason for optimism, but I think it would be completely normal to not be experiencing it after a recent loss. Yeah.
Thank you all. Would you each like to take just a minute or so each and to sum up? Is there anything else that you'd like to say about how to go forward with some hope?
Well, my hope is actually in all these wonderful questions, because I think, that people have put forward some very profound, some very personal, some very interesting questions, which, by the way, we did not have ahead of time. And so, the fact that people are thinking and feeling and processing all of this, by virtue of the questions we got, I mean, to me, that gives me hope.
Thanks, Greg. Doreen?
I don't have anything brilliant to add, except I'm a very huge believer in human resilience. So I think we're all going to be fine over time, but this is hard. This is a hard time.
Sure is. Sandra, any final comments?
I think it's important for us to be connected to our overall self. I also think that it's really important that we listen and we feel and we think right now with compassion and a lot of patience. A lot of patience.
A good suggestion. Well, we've come to the end of our program this evening, and I want to thank our panelists, Doreen Saskin, Sandra Rotholz, and Greg Hamovich, for sharing their insights and expertise. We really are grateful to all three of you, so thank you. Thank you to the Luke Sklar Mental Health Initiative at Holy Blossom Temple for organizing this event. You can find a list of mental health and COVID resources posted here in the chat, I believe, and also on the Holy Blossom website on the Luke Sklar Mental Health Initiative page. And Amy, thank you to Amy Lester for helping out tonight behind the scenes. And a big thank you to our Director of Communications, Deanna Levy, who makes all of the technical magic happen. Could not do this without her. And we wish everyone good health as we move forward. Stay hopeful, stay safe, and good night.
Good night. Thank you.